Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, Hyphens Classics. Today we're going to talk about the gearbox, the transfer case and the forward drive system in the early Land Rovers. So when I came to take this unit apart, I did a little bit of research to understand a little bit more about it, and I'd be quite interested in your comments on what you think of the early gearbox. Basically, some people call it had a permanent four-wheel drive, other people call it a freewheel system. I've heard some different reports. Now, at the time, when I first started taking it apart, I had one view, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And just recently, I've had another look at it, and I've seen a different view that has been is out there on the internet. Again, so I'd be very interested in hearing what you know and what you think this system is. When I first did my research, what I'd worked out is this is considered a full-time four-wheel drive system, and then when you operate the car in reverse, it's only a two-wheel drive. And the ring pull that we see in the floor of the driver's side, you lift that up and that will engage a dog clutch into the gear in the forward drive system, which locks it out, giving you a four-wheel drive in reverse. Now, the contention possibly is in the fact that the forward drive system is actually operated through a clutch. Now, it's a mechanical clutch. Obviously, there weren't too many electronics like we get in things like the Freelander and a lot of the modern all-wheel drive systems today. But the opposition or the opposing story that I've heard or read about, shall I say, on the internet, is that the system is little bit like that. So what people believe, or what I've read, is that the system operates as permanent rear wheel drive, but with the clutch it's a bit like a freewheel. So they're saying that it only operates the front wheels when the rear slips. Now, I'm no mechanic, but if you sit and think about it and you look at all the components, and what we'll do is I'll jump and show you some of the images, that doesn't quite make sense to me. So again, please put your comments below. But when I look at the system, the clutch operates in a viscous manner. So as the drive is spinning, there is the little rollers that catch, and it will only catch in one direction, and that would be in your forward drive. So while the forward drive is not permanently attached, so I guess you couldn't necessarily call it a permanent four-wheel drive system if you want to get technical about it, but because when the drive gear is, or shaft is, in going forwards, those rollers are going to pinch, and it will provide forward drive to the front wheels. Obviously, if you engage reverse in the car, the output shaft going up through the clutch is going to go in the opposite direction. Therefore, the little rollers are no longer going to pinch, so they'll just freewheel. Therefore, you will lose drive to the front wheels when you're going in reverse, which aligns a lot more with the research I did, and also aligns with the little tag that you see on the inside of the car. Now, obviously, if you want four-wheel drive in reverse, then again, in the floor of the driver's side, you pull the ring, and it engages the dog gear into the clutch, and that dog gear is sitting on the output shaft, is attached to the output shaft, and therefore would force drive to the front wheels in reverse. So again, guys, that's what I've read. That's what I understand. My belief is that it is what I first read, and what I believe is that it is kind of a forward drive system. It's not really understanding if the rear wheels are losing traction, and you don't use that dog gear for forward drive in forwards and reverse. It is purely for reverse. But again, I would really love to hear your comments, so please do put them below. And now we'll move on, and we'll go and take the gearbox apart, and we'll have a look at some of the images I created at that time. Moving into the car, we can see that the early gearbox had two sticks in it. Now, a lot of the Land Rovers had two sticks for quite a while, but then they had a third one later on. But for now, this one just has two, one with a black knob and one with a red. The black knob was your gears, so 4 forward and 1 reverse in this particular instance, and the red knob was your high-low selector. Down on the driver's floor, we can see a ring, and this is the ring that you pull when you want to get forward drive and reverse. And we discussed this topic a little while back. Again, please put your comments below. The next change that happened with the Land Rover, specifically around the gearbox, was later on in the 50 model, of which this vehicle is. And what that change was is they decided to remove the ring pull, which, who knows why, I'm not sure. Maybe it was too annoying, or maybe there was the hole, they didn't like the hole in the floor. But they moved it and created another stick, and this is the one with the yellow knob. And at first, this just took over the ring pull. It just did exactly the same thing. And it wasn't until much later, I believe somewhere around the 51 model, where that yellow knob became a selector for the two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. And therefore, the gearbox and the front drive part of the gearbox specifically was changed. So in this early model, there were two casings that held the clutch for the forward drive system. So this changed in the 51 model to become a more conventional two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive system. And in the later model, it just became a single casing holding the front drive system. As you can see in the first images that I'm displaying here, I've started to remove the transmission brake. The handbrake, relay and lever, as you can see here, are covered in grime, and that's because the dust cover that should be on there was nowhere to be seen. We can also see in this next image the speedo cable, which I hadn't removed yet, but obviously at some point needs to come away before I go and damage it. Turning the whole assembly upside down, we can see a continuation of this lovely mix of mud and oil. I could certainly see many hours of cleaning and scrubbing in my future to get this looking nice and new. Removing the transfer cover plate, I look back and think to myself, and I'm sure possibly some of you have thought this, why would someone design a transfer case, or a case specifically that's holding a significant amount of oil with just a flat bottom case? Surely that's a recipe for leaks. But then I guess maybe that was just the Land Rover recipe for success. Land Rovers have to leak. Who knows? Let me know your thoughts on that one as well. Looking into the transfer box on the right hand side, we can see the output shaft, or the main shaft out of the gearbox, which engages with the intermediate gear. And the intermediate gear is connected through the high ratio, which is a synchro gear, meshed into the output shaft, as we can see in the image at the moment. We can also see the larger low ratio gear, which has straight cut gears on it, which is selected by a lever, obviously the red knobbed one in the car, which selects your high-low ratios. Just remember, when you're starting to remove this, the intermediate gear comes out first. When you do pull it out, it has some shims in it, and this is obviously to make sure you take up some of the play. So make sure you don't lose them, and obviously when you're putting them back in, you're going to make sure you've got the right amount going back in. To remove the gearbox, you have to get inside the transfer case, because a number of the bolts holding it on are located from within the transfer box. So you have to take the intermediate gear out, and then you can reach some of these bolts. As we can see now, the gearbox is off. Some previous engineer has used a liberal amount of this red gasket sealer, which I'm sure was pretty good, but unfortunately it does get quite everywhere inside the gearbox, and I did find a lot of it all over the place. Moving to the front drive, we can see the levers for high-low ratio selecting and the ring pull lever on the end of the housing here. We can also see in the bell housing, we can see the hole where the clutch mechanism goes through from the foot pedal into the clutch release unit. As we can see here also, the front housing is in two pieces. There are two cases. And this is the bit we talked about earlier that becomes one case in the later model. As we can see on the housing here, there are some stamps on both housings right next to each other. Now, again, be very interested in your comments about what you think they are. I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark and say that if this gearbox had ever been back to Rover for a refurbishment, it could be a good way for an engineer, as they take a unit apart, to make sure that they put the same parts back together, so that the gearbox that they took apart went back as one unit. As in this image, we can see that I've removed the forward cover from the front drive. There's not a lot in this section, not quite sure exactly what it's there, but for the most part, the ball bearings and springs that hold selector gears in place are located in here, but again, nothing much else. Now looking in the first part of the front drive, we can see the clutch and the locking dog. In behind the locking dog is the retaining plate, and both of these, when these are both out the way, we can see the inner components of the clutch mechanism, and we can see the little rollers that I was talking about earlier that pinch up against the outside of the clutch. And now let's look at the clutch housing. Not the front drive clutch, now we're talking about the main clutch onto the engine. So with this vehicle, as I mentioned in an earlier episode, had a diesel engine in it running on the original gearbox. As part of this rebuild, the idea was to go back to the typical 1595, the 1600 engine, petrol engine. And so to do that, the bell housing had to go back to original. As part of that, the clutch housing has to also be changed. Now, the operation between the two is very, very similar. All right, so from the clutch pedal, you get that lever coming in from the side of the bell housing, as we showed you earlier, and you have a fork system that pushes out on a bearing through to the pressure plate. The difference is in the housing. With the bell housing and the way the lay shaft front bearing is held in place, there's just a slightly different shape to the way that is designed. Now, again, don't know why it changed. It is what it is. If you understand and know why this changed, then please let me know in the comments below. But as you can see from the images above, I have the 80-inch and we have the diesel clutch housings, and you can see the slightly different shape. 80-inch on the right, the diesel one on the left. So that's the clutch housing. I went through a couple of those to try and get all the right parts and make sure I had parts that weren't bent and wrecked. But we got those, and we'll show those later on when we go through the rebuild phase of the gearbox and the clutch. So just remember, guys, please do put some comments down below. Positive or negative, the feedback is going to be very useful to me in helping to grow this channel and put content on there that will be useful to you, hopefully in your projects or just of interest.